What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on the Ultimate Dino Ninja channel. We're doing What If Deku was Transported to danmachi Season 2 Part 3. And I'm gonna go down in comment section down below and tell me how your day is. You know, my day's been pretty good. Got some sun kiss because for some reason we didn't buy Crush. I guess they just were out. So go ahead and go down in the comment section and tell me how your day is. Or you can go do it over in my Discord. Speaking of the Discord, let's go shout out people who joined in between videos. Thank you, Sojo Lu. Captain Try Me. And if I accidentally pronounce any of these names wrong, I'm sorry. I'm like basically illiterate when it comes to most reading. Hell, I'm surprised I can even speak correctly half the time. Thank you, Pale Dragonisk and Ghost. Thank you all for joining the Discord. If you want to join the Discord, go ahead in the link in the description down below. You can post your suggestions there. You can post, your own personal promotion. You can post art, memes, whatever you think is good there. If you need help with homework, we just made a homework help chat. And there are pretty smart people over there, so if you need help with that, go ahead and click this and go check it out. And let's jump straight into this what if. Izuku woke up early the next morning. They were meant to leave very early. Izuku looked around and saw that no one was up, which kind of confused Izuku to the point where he wondered if he had woken up too late. But he found out he didn't, and the truth of the matter was that he found everyone. Well, everyone except for Eyes, of course, were asleep. Not awake at all. This caused Izuku to be mildly irritated, even at the god that was seen there performing such actions. But he knew that he couldn't complain to the fullest extent. Izuku looked around to try to see what else there was. He ended up noticing that Eyes had also walked out of her room and was training diligently. So Izuku decided to go ahead and go join her. Of course, Izuku felt like training was a good way to start off his day while waiting for the others to awake. Shortly after about 20 minutes after Izuku awoke, the other personnel at the current location started to awake as well. Izuku greeted each of them as Hermes then woke up and told them all that they need to finish getting their stuff ready, and then they shall be departing. It was an 11-day trip on the back of Wyverns, which Izuku himself thought was still an outrageous time period. But then again, he shrugged his shoulders, thinking that maybe being able to fly airplanes had kind of exfoliated him at this point. Or spoiled him. Not exfoliate. That's something totally different. So Izuku didn't want to fight back, saying that airplanes existed, even though he knew all four and well that even though he couldn't replicate an airplane, surely the greater minds of the world, if he gave basics in aerodynamics and understanding to them, they would be able to at least attempt to make something that's akin to an airplane. Of course, Izuku knew this wasn't always an option, so he decided to hold off for now. After they were all ready, they all hopped on the back of Wyverns. There were 3 Wyverns, one for Hermes himself, one for Belle and Artemis, as well as one for Izuku and Eyes. As they all hopped onto their Wyverns, Izuku and Eyes both prepared to set off, while Belle was relatively confused on how to work a Wyvern. Hermes had a basic understanding of this and looked towards Artemis. Artemis was pleasantly surprised by this endeavor because it gave her a reason to be more useful and more productive. Artemis dislikes being underproductive, so having some sort of case or reasoning is a nice little push for her. Izuku sighed, thinking that Hermes had already knew this, and his impression of the god was diminished slightly. But Izuku then remembered how his impression of most people here had diminished slightly, but remembered that worst case scenario, most people couldn't mess with him at the point that he was at. He had heard of very few people that were strong enough, or supposedly strong enough, to fight against him. These people all coming from a location that was apparently a very big familia, or two very big familias, but they had apparently passed away after traveling very deep within the dungeon, which confused Izuku to a point. If the dungeon was meant to be conquered at a base, why would it be so desolate at the bottom? It caused Izuku to wonder. The base aspect does not make sense. It's just illogical. But then again, he didn't really want to dwell on it much because he wanted to spend time with Eyes, seeing how they were going to be on a trip for a long time together, and seeing how they were both riding on the back of a single Wyvern, seeing how the Wyvern needed to stop periodically, but they wouldn't be making too many pit stops. Izuku thought this was a great time to actually experience and spend time with Eyes, which isn't something he got to do often. Of course, during the downtime, they are able to do it, but it tends to be with a third party also being around, be it Belle or anyone else. So Izuku was kind of excited for this trip. Even though they would be close enough for yelling distance, it was obvious that most people wouldn't mess with him. Izuku looked around. The Wyverns then curled together. Luckily for him, Eyes knew how to actually fly a Wyvern, which was a skill Izuku lacked, to say the least. Even though the thought almost made him laugh to a point, he knew that he was generally not lucky enough to have Wyverns back at his location, and really couldn't state that he would even know how to fly a Wyvern if he did have Wyverns there, which caused Izuku to tend to laugh even more. It was a particular situation he found himself in, trusting himself to riding a creature, which Izuku never thought he would have to do. Then again, Izuku could possibly make it there solo using float, as well as combining some of his other skills. Izuku decided against it for now, mainly for the reason that he was also about to travel over an ocean. And even though he knew if he pushed himself to the limits and used all of his magical power, he could probably take a pit stop or two at an island that he happened to find and make it there relatively easily. But he also knew that, with that being said, he couldn't just head there easily. Because even though he could make it, Belle, Artemis, as well as everyone else really couldn't. Izuku was still trying to think of a way that didn't involve using Overhaul's quirk. Sadly, he couldn't come up with many ways, but he decided to keep putting his mind to it. Izuku thought about maybe using Ares' quirk. Ares' quirk should allow him the ability to not only separate Artemis, but maybe bring back her fallen familiar members. It wasn't too out of the water to say that it was a possibility, but then again, the possibility itself was very slim. Just even using that quirk for a few seconds will probably quickly drain Izuku's energy reserves, and using it for any longer would probably kill him. So he decided to hold off on that for now, with obvious intent to try to prioritize it later. Obviously, if he were to go around using skills that had a chance to kill him, Izuku didn't think his girlfriend would appreciate that much at all. Maybe even feel upset by it, or just very simply feeling like he was doing a disservice to her. Because of this, Izuku said, "Nah, I'm not gonna do that." Which was a very thankful thing for Aiz and everyone else who centered themselves around Izuku. Izuku was wondering what he could possibly do to get stronger. He already knew fighting monsters gave him the capability of getting stronger, but that wasn't what he was talking about. He wanted a way to truly improve his strength, infinitely, without having to go deeper or fight more monsters. He knew that fighting monsters itself was an endangered risk, and could very simply lead to people dying, which wasn't an uncommon occurrence in the world that he found himself in. And the death of people tended not to be a good thing, which, granted, he was thankful for, but still thought that that shouldn't be the case, period. It shouldn't have taken a wise man to state, "Why don't we not think of this as like a normal everyday thing?" Izuku was really thinking about that. And even though right now he couldn't think of any ways, he believed he would be able to think of one later. Eventually, through persistence, to say the least, Izuku and Gain eventually found their way flying over there. Of course, they were at their first pit stop, which was to let the Wyverns rest a little bit, and so that they could recover their strength. Of course, Wyverns recovering their strength was a pretty necessary thing. We couldn't just have Wyverns going off and constantly flying, with the chance of them running out of strength and plummeting us into the sea. Izuku thought that was a pretty rational thing, to say the least. He looked around at the desolate island and saw that it was a pretty peaceful place. It didn't seem to contain too much wildlife in it, but granted, it didn't need too much wildlife. They had already brought pre-preserved rations, even though it was only enough to last them the entire time that they were meant to be out. It was still a decent enough amount, to say the least. Izuku decided that he would actually actively try to move on his and Ai's relationship. Because even though he had set in stone that they were going to be in a relationship, they haven't really moved on past hand-holding, which was kind of sad, to say the least. Izuku laughed, knowing that Bakugo would have most likely killed the nerd, or as Bakugo put him, as a nerd, for not moving his relationship farther along at a quicker time space, which once again caused Izuku to remind himself about Bakugo and everyone else. He already knew that most likely right now he could actually teleport back to his home, actually, and live a pretty peaceful life. But he knew that that would be a disservice to Aiz and his other friends that he made along the way here. But Izuku also didn't want to give up over there, so Izuku was at a conflicted crossroads. He didn't know what he should do. And he knew that eventually he was going to have to sit down and talk with Aiz, maybe after the whole entire thing was done. He would sit down and ask what she thought was the correct choice, hoping that Aiz would help give him a different lookout on a situation that he didn't have before. Of course, this was a hope that he hoped was going to be fulfilled and not thrown to the wayside. But then again, he hoped that Eyes had a way. He could always settled for teleporting Eyes back to his own world, but Izuku thought that that would also be incorrectly done. It would cause Eyes herself to leave the world that she knows and all the friends that she has just to be with him, which Izuku found to be a pretty messed up way of life. So he decided against it for the simplest means that he figured it was messed up. Izuku wondered what he should do. At the base, he had options to take, but while he was thinking about it, he decided to push it aside for now. He decided that there was no reason that he should even be worrying about it, much less contending to try to fix it. It wasn't his mess to fix, of course. Then again, Izuku also knew that when it came time for him to eventually have to go back, he couldn't stay here forever, that he would go. But he didn't know how well Eyes and the other members of the Loki familia will take this, much less Loki herself. Izuku knew Loki was quite scary when she wasn't happy with him. So he decided not to test the goddess's anger, or not test it so much to where he would die if he continued talking. Izuku sighed, and Eyes picked this up. Granted, Eyes might not be the most informationally excellent person when it came to telling social cues of other human beings, but she had a pretty good idea of Izuku's. Be it that he was easy to read, or just that she cared that much about him. Izuku looked towards Eyes and said, just very simply, that he was thinking about something, that a choice he would have to make in the future, and that he didn't know which way or how he would choose it. Eyes, thinking that this was probably related more akin to marriage, gave her approval, saying any decisions that he would to make, she would follow. Of course, she doesn't know what decisions he was talking about, but it helped out Izuku at least a little bit. This caused Izuku to get a slight smile on his face, but decided not to push the issue any further. For a multitude of reasons, he could only describe as a friendly interest, to say the most and the least at the same time. Eventually, they were setting out, and almost like that, Deku and Aiza's relationship slowly got closer and closer. And by the time the 11th day finally ended, they had arrived at the island. Izuku could sense a presence inside the island itself. It didn't worry him as much as shake him to the core. He could tell there was a creature in there that was far stronger than any creature he faced. That much was obvious. He just didn't know what to do about it. The base aspect of this creature seemed to be excellently strong. And while Izuku was realizing this, he also seemed to notice something. It was weird. It almost seemed like his senses was heightened. Or at least, his sense of danger was heightened, heavily. He thought about checking it up to instincts, but that didn't seem to make sense here. If it was instincts, he's already honed those heavily. Over all the time he was actually fighting other people and villains. So Izuku knew it couldn't just be instincts. Instincts alone wouldn't explain everything else. He wondered what it could be. He was tempted to ask Eyes, but decided against it. He didn't know what this feeling was, but he knew it was something new. It almost seems like his senses in general were heightened. almost akin to some weird ability. Izuku was wondering if maybe somehow he broke through and unlocked another portion of One for All. But then Izuku thought that didn't make sense. He wasn't doing any massive training. Actually, quite the opposite. He was more of relaxing than massively trying to train. This confused Izuku even more, as he almost sat down to try to contemplate what was going on. Of course, Aiz noticed this and walked over and asked Izuku what's wrong. And Izuku stated he thinks he unlocked a new skill. This confused Aiz, because the fact of Izuku being able to unlock a new skill out of nowhere was pretty amazing. Not too many adventurers can just randomly unlock skills, and if Izuku was able to unlock a skill randomly, Aiz was excited for him. Izuku sighed, and then noticed that it was getting late. So even though they landed on the island, Hermes suggested that maybe they camped out for the night. Izuku and I shared a tent because they had only brought free to reserve space for other resources they needed. Izuku closed his eyes before he slowly drifted to sleep. And that's where I'm going to leave this episode off, guys. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, goodbye.